Welcome to Canadian music in the 80s and 90s and more. A. Don't forget the A part. That's what makes it Canadian. um, it's my pleasure to invite Eric Alper to join me. Thank you for joining me, Eric.
Thanks for having me, and thanks for recognizing the A part, because you could have just really talked to anybody from the 80s and 90s from the UK and the US, but no, you guys stick it with the Canadian stuff. So that's great. Good to meet you.
Primarily, for sure. I will go outside the Canadian realm. That's the more part, I guess. But um, anyway, yeah. I know you as whenever I watch the news and there's a big new music story out, you're the guy they go to, whether it be on most of the Canadian news channels that I watch.
Mm.
You seem to be the guy they go to talk about what's big in music going on if there's a big story going around. Because you are a publicist, you work in public relations. Um, just briefly, tell me how you got into that.
I was always a fan of music, and I could never play an instrument if my life depended on it, and I still can't. And so when I was growing up, I had a subscription to Billboard magazine because I loved reading the stories about music and managers and record labels. When I was 8, I saw the movie American Hot Wax, which told the story of the Cleveland DJ Alan Freed, who pretty much
Mhm.
coined the term rock and roll and who led the rock and roll revolution to with teenagers through his radio show in Cleveland. And I loved it. And the movie was a docudrama, but at the end of it, it culminated into a concert with the real life Chuck Berry and Jerry Lee Lewis. And those two, as an 8-year old, absolutely blew my mind. I've never seen anybody like them. Um, it was like my Star Wars. It was like,
Right.
who are these creatures from a different planet? And so I read about them. I got books from the library. I went to the library every week to read up on music when I was a kid, and that kind of led to the subscription in Billboard magazine. So I figured out who was who and who did what, and all of these people were just people that were completely unattainable. I had no idea how to do anything like that. But when I was in university, I with the arts editor of the campus newspaper, the Excalibur. And then I got to meet other publicists in music because they were pitching me on doing stories or pitching the staff that I had on doing
Right.
stories, and realized that this looks like a pretty good gig. You essentially go to concerts, you get a lot of free records, you give them out, and everybody likes you. And what's the worst thing that can happen with that? So when I graduated, I started a record label, then a booking agency, then a public relations company in music, and I ditched the record label part and the booking agent part because that was awful. But the PR stuff I got really easily because I loved the media. I loved reading newspapers and magazines and everything I can get my hands on, and I love music. So this was a perfect opportunity to kind of merge the two. And I've been doing that every day since 1995. And when the media called on me, that was just me kind of bringing the artist to various television shows and radio stations like, as a publicist. And then I got asked one day if I would do a segment on box sets, the best box sets of the year on Canada AM, which was the
Yep.
national television show. And I was like, yeah, sure. Like, why not? I put on my best suit, called up all the record labels and said, hey, I got a segment on. And they were like, what? Like, you're from the industry. You're not supposed to be talking about us when we're
Yeah.
so close to it. But I knew the line really early on that, I never talked about negative stories that were going on, no matter how much I did. I don't talk about legal issues. Um, and good and bad, I could always see the bright spot in something. And if there was somebody that I didn't want to talk about or something that was bad that I couldn't even think about the bigger picture. Like for instance, if an artist got caught using racial language, like I'm not going to go there because there's
Right.
nothing good about any of that. But you know, you can definitely talk about the social media aspect of it, the economic situation that is going to be, um, brought upon that artist. Even somebody like a Morgan Wallen, like
Mhm.
there's still a great deal of people who will not let him through the doors of the industry. And no matter how you feel about him, the fact is that the rest of the industry has kind of let him in, but only certain parts. Radio is blowing up for him. Obviously, he's got the biggest two, three albums
Yeah.
of the last 25 years in country music. Um, but I could never really talk about that kind of stuff because I just don't want anybody to think that I'm okay or not okay with it. I just kind of want to go in and explain sometimes the situation to an audience that may or may not get a little bit of an inside view of what's going on in the industry. And that's so I just kept saying yes to everything that came my way. And here we are. It led me to you.
Yeah, and I can't thank you enough for doing this. This is really great to talk to someone who's been around the industry for so long.
So long.
And made
I'm so old.
oh, you can't.
I'm so old. I'm almost, yeah, no, I'm only kidding. Yeah.
Okay, this should show you how old I am.
Yeah. I saw that tour, bought the shirt. Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. High and dry
Hamilton,
and pyromania and
Cops Coliseum. I had to see them
all
in
of
the
it.
round.
All of it. Love is like a bomb, baby. Come and get it on. Absolutely.
Yep, so that
And is
should
that
tell you.
just not is that just not a spot for life too? I mean, whenever I'm stuck, I like to think of the wise words of Joe Elliott, you know.
Yeah, for sure. So let's give us a breakdown of some of the artists that you've actually worked with and continue and some you continue to work with today.
Well, when I was working at Koch and then Entertainment One, it was the largest independent record label and distributor in North America. And at the time when I first got hired, there weren't that many, there weren't any distributors really in Canada, certainly in Canada, definitely around the world.
Right,
There was only a few people who actually did publicity while working for a distributor because most of the labels that they distributed were based in America or the UK. And they didn't care about Canada because we were 4% of the world market to them. So they were like, here's your box of 60 CDs, here's the 8x10s, here's the bio. See ya, go
yeah,
nuts. And so during that time it was wild because I would be working Ringo Starr in the morning and Guar in the afternoon and the Wiggles at night and Sesame Street in the evening and then wake up the next day and work Ziggy Marley and then work Thursday and Taking Back Sunday and Ray Charles and Bob Geldof and Sinead O'Connor and so um it was amazing and it still is amazing
yeah.
but that was truly variety right there. And so when I left the Entertainment One and started my own PR company, I had a lot of artists that came with me that I'm still working to and with to this day, like David Clayton Thomas and Sass Jordan and 5440, Andy Kim, The Spoons, Honeymoon Suite. So
Hmm.
just a lot of Canadian bands, like Mark Jordan, Amy Sky, Bruce Coburn, Murray McLaughlin, um, Barney Bentall. Uh, and I know I'm missing a whack of them, but those were artists that I grew up buying their records. I mean, I bought their records, and to be working with them is just nothing short of an honor. And I want to do right by them every single day, even though that they're not selling a million copies anymore. Their videos aren't getting played on Much Music. Much Music doesn't exist, but their albums and their music and their videos are still really important to them, and they're really important to a group of people out there. So I want to always do right by them because they're those artists that I'm working with today are the reasons why I got into music in the first place. And so it's always been a blast and will forever be a blast, especially working brand new artists like Mike Byrne or um um who just I mean there's so many great artists that I'm working with now that are on the cusp of starting their career that it's so cool to see them in the beginning stages of their career doing really, really
Right.
well with areas that just didn't exist when I was working this stuff even 15 years ago with Facebook and TikTok and Twitch and Instagram and
Right.
Spotify and SiriusXM and satellite radio. None of this existed. So it's wild to see all the changes. Never lose sight of the fact that um that it was never my job to dictate how people should listen to music. I just want them to listen to music.
Yeah, it's funny you mentioned that. Like, it's great that you're really still into bringing along new artists as well. But the thing I like to kind of show on my channel and my Facebook group is that you talked about Barney Bentall earlier. Like, guys like him are still making music today,
Yeah.
and I find some of their new music today is as good as the hits that you would have known
Oh yeah, for
back in the
sure.
day. And it's just a shame that doesn't get the attention it deserves.
Yeah,
So
it was always like that. I mean, it's always neat to read people proclaiming the death
yeah,
of the industry or certain artists because of radio or because of not having much music. But
right,
it was always like that. You go through, even an artist, look, even the Beach Boys or whoever,
right.
pick an artist that have been around for longer than 15 years, and they're going to have some albums that those artists will absolutely go to their dying days saying that that was better than the one that ended up selling 15 million albums. But radio wouldn't play it. I got too old. They stopped playing white male rock bands,
Yeah,
instead putting the focus on, and rightfully so, on BIPOC artists or LGBTQIA artists or different genres that they just ignored for decades. So yeah, but it's always been that case, but it's not a struggle. It's just different because you don't
right.
have those gatekeepers like the three people at radio to talk to in Toronto that can completely knock all the dominoes down to get your music heard. Um, Now there might be one person in that city. There might be three people in the whole province. There's, I mean, we're all influencers.
Right.
We all have access to the same music. We all have access to every radio station and every video channel in the world. We all get to share something that we all love, and hopefully they'll help find an audience too.
Yeah, the technology has definitely
Yeah,
changed the way we listen to music and the way we can access it. Like, it's more accessible than any before. Whereas like
for
back in
sure.
the Much Music days, you needed Much Music and you needed radio to hear some of the stuff.
And you needed those albums in the stores. I mean,
Yeah,
now, like, it's funny, like whenever, so, sometimes in the media, the people in the media will call me whenever somebody dies. And I'll always end the segment with like, this is really, really sad because the artist isn't here anymore, but watch those sales go through the roof like it always has, whenever somebody passes away. But the difference is that you don't have to hope that when you found out that Miles Goodwin passed away, that the local record store, A, provided that you can find a record store, but B, your local record store has a copy of April Wine's greatest hits. And if so, that you can
yeah,
afford it. And if so, you actually have a record player or a CD player left in your home to play it in the first place. Now, you hear about news, you hear about a tour, you hear about somebody passing away, you hear about a reunion tour, you hear about a brand breaking up, and all of it is right there, right in front of you, which is remarkable. It's amazing. And yet I still listen to the same 100 songs over and over again.
for sure. Can you explain why like the technology is obviously there, but I've never been able to explain why vinyl is back again. I'm even hearing cassette tapes are back again.
Yeah,
I'm hearing rumors 8 tracks might make a comeback, which
yeah,
is crazy, but
yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, there's always a couple of reasons. The first is that there's that generation that grew up with CDs who, when vinyl records were smatteringly out there, was always listening to the argument and hearing the argument that vinyl was always better than CDs. So once the CDs stopped drying up in terms of rack space and people manufacturing them, the easy thing to do was to go back into your record collection for that nostalgia's sake and listen to the albums again because you couldn't find them on CD. Then there's a whole segment of the population, mostly a younger demographic, people who love Taylor Swift and Ariana Grande and Drake and The Weeknd and
yeah,
Billie Eilish. Those fans want to show how big of a fan they are on social media. It's an ego thing, it's a pride thing. But when you
mhm,
have artists like BTS, for instance, or Blackpink, um, coming in from the K-pop world, they're making 17, 18, 20 different formats of the same vinyl record. One vinyl edition has these 8 tracks. This one has these 9 tracks. This one has different postcards in it and tchotchkes, as you know. This one has a full color poster. This one doesn't, but it has three
Right.
extra tracks. So you give your fan base an opportunity to buy more. Some people would be calling that exploitation of the fan. Um, and the other part of it is that I think people just like having vinyl in their homes. I mean, I do. I mean, right in the background, I've got
Yeah.
my 6 favorite albums of like the last couple of years. I don't open them up. It's not like that I'm a collector by any means, um, but I like having them around. They're just cool looking, and I have record players, but none of them are actually plugged in. So then you end up with that segment of the population who like to buy things just to display them, and not even listen to them. And in fact, there's a number of studies done last year when the vinyl boom was really big that that found out that almost 50% of people who buy vinyl on a regular basis, which is like 6 copies a year, don't even have a record player. They just want to support the artist and they want to support the industry and show it off. And it's like, great. I do that with books. Oh my God, there's probably books in here that look great on my shelf that I'll be like, this book is like 900 pages. I don't know if I'm going to get through it, but same thing
Right.
with vinyl.
I know there's a lot of books I have that I mean to read, but I just haven't
Yeah.
gotten to it. But
You're just saving it up,
I had to
saving it up
have it.
until you're
Yeah.
80. Yep.
Um, I got help with you to I got you helped me get an interview with Michael Williams about the Much Music
Mhm.
documentary. You did a lot of work for that. How was it working with that? Like, did you get to see the doc before it
I
got
did. I
released?
didn't. I saw the doc before just to make sure that I liked it.
Yeah.
And then when I met Sean, the director and producer and editor and everything, I loved him. And then I found out who was actually going to be available for the media. And it was Michael Williams, Erica M, Rick Campanelli, Monica Diol, um, and a couple of others for the Toronto screening of it. Um, and I knew all of them. I except for maybe Monica, I didn't hang out at Electric Circus because if anybody had seen me dance before, you'll completely understand why. But Rick, I've known for a while. Erica, I've known for ages and ages as a friend. Michael Williams, I've known for that long too. So once I knew that I get to work with them, in doing media, it was just a no-brainer for me to say yes to this. And I made Sean just a deal he couldn't refuse because I really wanted to work it. And that's the amazing thing about getting older and being whatever established that people think it is, and that I am, is that, if I want to work something, I'll I'll kind of beg and plead to do it because it's going to be amazing. It's going to be fun. And when publicists get to work fun things, it really shines through. You work harder. You again, you want to please the talent, and
Right.
I got it. I got what the Much Music 299 Queen Street doc meant to people because it meant that to me. So I figured that if I loved seeing it, then other people would like to see it as well.
Oh, for sure. It came. I
And
got.
Michael Williams is great. You ask him, "Hey man, how are you?" And then like 35 minutes later, not only hasn't he answered that question, but he's giving you the entire history of the Canadian music scene, touching on things that nobody talks about. It's brilliant. I love hanging out with him because you don't have to ask him anything. And I mean that in an absolute good way, is that once he's off, you better be taking notes because he's spitting the truth.
No, he was a fantastic guy to talk to before the documentary came out. I was kind of fascinated to hear that he didn't really want to be part of it at first, but then when he found out that Sean got a second mortgage on his house to make the
Yeah.
documentary, he was like, "Well, that's commitment."
That's commitment.
You
Yeah,
know, that's the kind of
absolutely.
guy you want to help. You
You
know what I mean?
want that's the guy that you want batting behind you in a baseball game for sure.
Exactly. And no, I mean I really enjoyed the documentary myself. Like, so does that, like you said, it helps when you're passionate about the project you're working on. You really do put more into it because you love it too and you want to see it do well. Is there a lot of projects like, are most of the projects you do like that?
All of them. All of them. I can't work anything that I don't like. And in fact, even when I was at the record label, there were artists that I knew were going to sell a lot of copies,
Hmm.
but get very little media attention. Just simply because they just weren't playing the kind of music, or they weren't the kind of artist that the media was going to be covering. In some cases, children's music or old time crooners, they just don't get a lot of love in the media. And then conversely, there was a number of artists that I might have not loved, but I understood their place in the world, and I
Right.
understood that the media was going to dig them. So great. All I want to do is just kind of make people happy. I want to make the media happy by providing them with story ideas and stuff to fill their pages or their podcasts or their website, because I know they're looking for interesting stuff. I mean, and part of it is just kind of trying to figure out what somebody can talk to you about for a half hour on a podcast or write 600 words about. And I think when you're a brand new artist, that's the it's not hard, but that's, I think, the toughest thing to try to figure out, other than actually the artist making really good music, is trying to figure out what's so interesting about you and so different about you. And I love doing that too, because I love kind of figuring out people like a puzzle, trying to figure out what makes you so great and what makes you so different. Because during COVID and during the lockdown, you got to
Hmm.
remember that almost every song that I was getting to work, and every artist that I signed up to work with me and vice versa, it was all slower songs. It was all about isolation. It was
Hmm.
all about breaking up. It was all about alienation, loneliness, unhappiness. And the media was just being bombarded with hundreds of those songs every single day. So you were kind of looking for the edge and trying to figure out, well, what makes this 17-year-old from Burlington, Ontario so different than that 19-year-old from Vancouver who's kind of going through the same thing, because we're all going through the same thing
Right.
during COVID. Um, and so that's part of the fun. And even though that, yes, the death and the destruction and the absolute bonkerness of this planet during COVID, um, the artist knew that they had to continue to create, and I didn't stop for a day. There was nothing. What else was I going to do? I didn't. They didn't have a choice. They needed to keep creating, and I didn't want to stop, so I didn't.
Well, it's yeah, and now that we have the avenue to do that with the technology like Zoom calls like we're doing right
Yeah,
now, and it's easier to get it out there now. You don't necessarily have to go out on tour that like a
yeah,
lot of people were
yeah,
doing concerts online, which I
yeah,
remember. I remember Catherine McClellan and Tara
yeah.
McLean did a song together about, when this is all over with, it was just a beautiful song. I don't know if you ever heard it, but
Yeah, yeah, I have. Yeah, and it's interesting because a lot of the artists that I work with continue to do online concerts, and because live streaming is still a viable option for a lot of artists who
sure.
don't either want to tour because financially it's not happening for them.
Right,
They might have a job, they might have a family, they might have a dog that they don't want to, leave home.
right,
But they still want to play in front of people, and they still want to figure out the new economy and figure out if there's a part of getting paid to do what you love and perform music for people, if that might happen with selling tickets or offering tip jars. So live streaming, even though it's kind of gone away a little bit, it's still, I'm surprised that it went away so quickly, because there's still a lot of artists out there whose audience isn't, they're not really interested in seeing them live.
yeah,
There's still a lot of classic rock artists that are out there and touring and making bonkers amount of money. There's still a lot of really successful artists in their 20s and 30s, like SZA, who are doing
right.
huge box office stuff. But there's a great segment of population that are getting very, very big very quickly on TikTok or Instagram or Twitch. And their audience probably they're not interested it's not like that they're not interested in seeing them. They're also not interested in really going out. There's
Right.
there's too much competition out there. Netflix is a competition. I'll never forget Reed Hastings, the president and
Hmm.
founder of Netflix. He was asked what's his competition, and he said sleep. And I thought that was a fascinating answer. Sleep is Netflix's competition, and that should be all of our competition because these artists aren't trying to be competition with another rock and roll artist or pop artist in their
Right.
city. Their competition are the Beatles and the Who and Billie Eilish and Louis Armstrong and Frank Sinatra because we're all after the same eyes and ears as everybody else. And so the live stream aspect of it was interesting because I just thought that that was going to be continuing a lot more simply because everybody has access to a camera.
Yeah, everyone's got a like pretty
Yeah.
awesome camera on their phones nowadays.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, all the shooting I do outside of Zoom calls is on my phone. Like,
Right.
it's
Yeah.
amazing what you can do with it.
Absolutely.
Um, Now when it comes to like you've seen what Taylor Swift did with her concert movie, could you see that being something that more artists do?
Yeah, I think so. I think it still depends that you've got to have a pretty sizable audience in order to make a deal, at least go direct to AMC theaters and Cineplex theaters and bypass that
Right,
traditional Hollywood system. Taylor Swift has been able to do it. Beyonce has been able to do it. But it wasn't that long ago that, Justin Bieber had his documentary in theaters
right,
or Katy Perry had hers. Um, y- there's definitely an angle to ensure that when you are that big of an artist that you can control not just the medium but you can
right,
control the message and that you don't have to rely on the traditional media or any third party to control the message that you want to give the language that you want to use. You can actually do it yourself and build it yourself and show it to that fan base. But I think it's kind of like those, when Radiohead did a pay what you can for one of their
yeah,
albums. Um I remember there were a whole slew of talk in the industry of like, how much can we do of this? Because Radiohead made a lot of money. They were making because on average, people were spending anywhere between $5 and $8 on a record, which doesn't seem like a lot for a digital download. But it was also during the time of free downloads and MP3.com and all of these different
right,
pirating sites. So to get any money out of people at the time was a win. Um, so I think you still have to have an audience. I think it would be interesting to see if people can start making documentaries and make them interesting without losing their shirts or without, in Sean's case, mortgaging his house twice
right.
in order to find maybe 1,000 people that are willing to spend $10 on it. And that's a little bit of money. Um,
Yeah,
and but it's making the documentary. I think you still need those investors and you still need that backing in order to get the thing done in the first place.
absolutely. I agree with that 100%. I guess the first documentary I really remember going to the theater to watch was U2's Rattle and Hum.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And I don't remember really seeing anything quite up to that level in a long time. Well, there might be, but I mean, I'm missing some of it on Netflix, but not in the theater the way it was. I remember lining up at the movie theater to see that. It was such a demand to see it back then.
Yeah,
But I don't know
yeah.
if any other bands, and before that,
No, because it wasn't because after that, around 87, I think that must have been, it was, I mean, you're only 3 years away, 4 years away from grunge. And that
yeah,
certainly wasn't cool to be seen as a band that was exploiting their fan base. And maybe that was seen as exploiting their fan base, however good that you think it was. Because I mean, I saw that tour. I would have loved, but you didn't really have to though, because at the time you still had VHS, you still had
yeah,
DVDs. So even for you two to do the Zoo TV tour after that, and then put the documentary and then all their videos and then the making of, and then the live concert from Australia, then here's one from Slane
right.
Castle. You didn't really need to go in the theaters because you were just selling enough at the record store in order to make that.
It even goes back to, I remember Much Music used to actually put on concerts, go out and tape concerts by some of our favorite bands. I remember seeing the Spoons, the Big Ticket. I remember they used to
Yeah,
show
yeah,
those all the
yeah.
time. I remember seeing the Spoons and Honeymoon Suite
The Big Ticket.
and the
Wow. Look
Tragically
at
Hip. I
you.
think they did a Tragically Hip show from the
Yeah,
Misty Moon in Halifax and
yeah.
in their early days. But I mean, they just don't do that anymore. But I guess I don't know if
No.
there's an audience for it or not. But I certainly remember those performances. Some of them stood out to me, like even when they used to do Snow Job or their spring
Yeah.
breaks.
Or I
Yeah,
and I. Yeah.
yeah, exactly. Like some of those performances were just,
Amazing.
yeah, they were amazing
Amazing.
performances, and they just don't seem to do that
Yeah.
anymore. But I like because it was more than just the biggest artists of the day. They really did focus on a lot of great Canadian. They broke so many Canadian acts,
So
which
many.
is why I love them so much. Because I mean, you'd see the biggest hit of the day, and then you'd see that "I'm an Adult Now" video
Yeah.
by The Pursuit of Happiness, which looks
Yeah.
like it was shot with a cheap camera they borrowed
For
off
like eight
somebody.
dollars.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Um,
Jan Arden once told me that, the before Much Music, the day before she got played on Much Music, she could walk down the street completely anonymous.
right.
The day after Much Music first aired her video, she got mobbed in the shopping mall. Like
Wow.
that was, I mean, that was what it was like. I mean, you had an audience of everybody. Everybody watched Much Music. And it was the same with MTV in the US, but hanging out in the smoking section of
Yeah.
high school was like, here's the jocks, they're watching Much Music for their kind of music. Here's the pre-emo goth people,
Yeah.
for Susie and the Banshees and the Smiths and the Cure, and then hanging out with like the pop people, and there's like the Honeymoon Suite and the Spoons and Platinum Blonde and Corey Hart, and then the rockers of like Tom Cochran, and it was all over the place. And to have artists like Big Sugar and Molly Johnson and Pursuit of Happiness and Blue Rodeo, um, still making music.
Yeah.
Bare Naked Ladies, you
Canada
know?
had a superstar system because of Much Music.
Absolutely. And
You
just
know,
exploding. And that's
like,
not, Brian Adams and all of those people. But even in the 90s, they were breaking Alanis Morissette and Shania Twain and
yeah,
Celine Dion. Like it was massive. It was massive. But that's what happened when you had like 8 channels.
yeah, and Much Music you even used to promote French music
Yeah.
on Music Plus. So it's mean
Yeah.
Quebec had its own
I
superstar
still do.
system. They
Yeah.
exactly they still do. And I always the one thing that always stood out to me, this is the one thing I wish they would have touched on in the documentary. Sorry, Sean. I really used to like the Much West, Much East
Yeah.
when they used to cover like regions in Canada. Like you'd see Terry David Mulligan interviewing all the West
Yeah.
Coast bands, and Mike Campbell was covering all the East Coast bands, and you really got a taste of what it was like at both ends of the country.
Absolutely.
I wish he would have touched more on that because I thought that was one of my favorite parts. Um,
Yeah.
and I'll never forget the one time Terry David Mulligan was in Toronto and he had Colin James and Jeff Healey do an acoustic jam live on the air.
Right.
I don't know if you've ever seen it.
I have.
It's on YouTube now, but I'll never forget that. I was absolutely in awe watching those two play
Yeah.
together. Um, and they became superstars after that, like
Yeah.
all over the world. Like look at Jeff Healey, he did Roadhouse shortly after that. And
Yeah, for sure.
so I mean, yeah, they really, and there were a lot of radio stations involved in breaking Canadian music. Like CFNY was famous for it. Like I heard a lot of great bands on CFNY before they got really big. And then QN07 with their homegrown albums used to
Yeah.
break a lot of bands before they got famous. I think Honeymoon Suite was one of those bands, if I'm not
Yeah.
mistaken.
Yeah, and Boy
Um,
Brigade. Yeah. Oh, yeah. The Edge. I mean, CFNY back in their day broke everybody. I mean,
yeah,
everybody coming in from the UK, from Depeche Mode to Frankie Goes to Hollywood to Duran, a little bit of Duran Duran, when Chris Shepard used to play them. But
right,
like Jane's Addiction and Nine Inch Nails, like you just, you didn't hear this on any other radio station.
for
And,
sure.
maybe maybe K Rock in LA. There's always a smattering
Right.
of underground stations or campus stations and community stations in the US, but we just didn't have any of that here. At least not on that kind of large scale commercial level, except for CFMY.
But I mean, they played like Skinny Puppy and the
Yeah,
Spoons, and
Ministry and yeah,
yeah, they covered a lot of ground back then, and just
yeah.
got in
Rusty and Glue Leg, yeah, all of it.
like even in the 90s, Canada had a superstar system of Canadian bands that you'd see at Edgefest every year, like 5440 and the
Kind of
Killjoys,
Line
and
Crush and yeah, or they
yeah, the Tea
yeah,
Party and Our Lady Peace broke out in a big way back then too. Like
yeah,
it was a big superstar system in the 90s, and you just look at it and you're like, these are all Canadian. Like it was
yeah,
amazing to see how big those bands got because of a station like The Edge and Much
yeah,
Music Together.
yeah. It's amazing, and we'll never have it again.
Well, I don't know. I like to think
Never have it.
maybe I
Never.
I never underestimate the value of nostalgia, and that's kind of why I'm doing
Oh
what I
no. I
do.
mean that stuff will always be there, at least for our generation, until like it gets rediscovered somewhere on TikTok. But we will never have that many people
Hmm.
watching the same things over and over again. There's just too we're too scattered. We're just too much. We're almost at a time before we're almost at a time before much music happened when like everybody had their own little scene. Nobody knew what
Right.
anybody else was listening to or watching. And the choices were whatever you had your hands on
Yeah.
and whatever access you had. Now, I mean, even the number one, I mean, and I know I'm gonna sound old and I know I don't care, but you know, there was a time for a lot of decades where the number one album in America or Canada would be omnipresent. It's why when I post and tweet on social media on this day in music history facts, it gets way more attention than anything else that I post on there because everybody was just watching the same thing, reading the same five magazines in Canada
Hmm.
or in America, listening to the one radio station that might have played your music, and that's
Right.
it. And now there's just far too many choices. So we're all that,
But
and that's okay.
it's
That's all
good in
right.
a way because if you want something,
Oh yeah,
you can easily search for it and find it. But it
oh
does
definitely,
a lot of it does get buried,
totally.
and the other thing is there an audience? I mean, obviously, guys like you and me are so into it, will look for stuff. But I
Yeah.
find most people just can't be bothered.
Oh, most people don't even listen to music for more than 15 minutes a day, and maybe it's in the car or
Yeah.
while they're traveling. I mean, there's no way. It's funny, like, when somebody once said, the average person listens to 18 hours of music a week, and I was like, a day, and they said no, a week, and I'm like, a day, because that's me.
Well, I
From the
mean,
minute I wake up until the minute I go to sleep, there's always something going on.
the
But
retros,
I know I'm different, and that's why I'm deaf.
and then I find a lot of the retro stations, I guess, are owned by a company.
Yeah.
I don't want to mention any, but I listen to one at work all day, and they play a lot of great music, but they play the same Queen song every day.
Because if you liked it back in 1977, you'll like it in 2023.
Well, I do like it, but not for the millionth time I've heard it in my
Yeah.
lifetime.
Yeah.
And I just sit back and I go, Journey does have another song other than Don't Stop Believing. They have
Yeah.
several
Yeah.
that you
But
could
but
play.
that but that opens up things like deep tracks on SiriusXM, right? Like though
Right.
there's internet radio stations that will play the ninth song on the album that nobody really listened to. And there's
Yeah,
definitely an audience out there for that too. And there's always new people that are getting into stuff for the first time as well, right? Like,
sure.
when Stranger Things has Kate Bush or Metallica, there's a whole millions of people who have never heard of Kate Bush before who are going
Right.
to be listening to those retro stations going, oh, this stuff is really, really good. While the older people just move on to the real oldie station.
Yeah, for sure, for sure. No, man, if I could talk to you forever, Eric. You just have such good knowledge and a good base of knowledge. I mean, I thought I had a lot of knowledge, but you're just blowing me
Oh
away.
no, you
So
are completely fine. No, the great thing about music is that it's very humbling because
yeah,
when you the more you know, the more you realize you don't know and you'll never have a clue about. So just
right,
when I think I've got a handle on something, it's like, dude, you know nothing about, compared
right.
what the real stories is. But that's what keeps everybody going and it's fun. Look,
And
it
it
beat
brings people together.
yeah, it beat talking about banking.
That's for sure. And it's always funny when you can bring up something you think nobody remembers, and somebody does.
Right, right. And you're like, hey, there you go.
You do you
Yeah.
remember that? Like
Yeah, exactly.
like I was talking to
Exactly.
a CBC radio guy yesterday here in Charlottetown, who I think you should absolutely get in touch with, Lee Rosevere.
Oh yeah, yeah. Yeah, I know Lee.
He is a music encyclopedia, and
Yeah.
I love
He's
talking
great.
to him. But I used to hear we talked about Christmas music yesterday, because that's like a whole new marketing thing in its
Yeah,
own thing. But I used to hear this thing every year by Stan Freberg on the radio. It's called Christmas Dragnet.
right.
And I only
Yeah.
know two other people that have heard of it, but Lee's heard of it. I'm like, really? You know it? I'm like, that's amazing.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. And then now you and Lee are best buds and going out for lunch next week. Like
Yeah,
it's the great equalizer for all of that. But look, man, it's so good to talk to you and congratulations on the podcast. I think it's such a great idea about what you're doing.
I appreciate it. I'm doing it for fun. I'm passionate about it. I don't know where I'm going with it or where it'll go. I mean, I hope it goes somewhere, but even if it doesn't, I'm having fun doing it. And,
Yeah. Who
you know,
cares?
I've made a connection with a guy like you, and that's not a bad thing either. So,
And now you can rest.
yeah,
Now you are beholden. No, it's good because the fact is that nobody cares what anybody does. Like Ed Sheeran can disappear for a year, and yeah, the fans will be really sad, but nobody really cares. The world
no,
will not stop turning. You got to just continue to do what you love to do and turn it into a life because you get to do this. Because we're so lucky to be able to do this. I
for
have a
sure.
microphone, I have an internet connection, I know how to read, I have a record player, I have access to
Mhm.
music. I can afford things that a lot of people just simply can't. And I'm absolutely lucky to be
Mhm.
born in Canada here in the situation that I'm in. And so why not be able to kind of want to do good and put the spotlight on people because a lot of people just can't. So keep going, man.
Thanks, I appreciate it. It's good to hear something like that from someone like yourself. It makes me want to keep going
Yeah, absolutely, for
and
sure.
just makes me realize maybe I'm not doing it for nothing. So,
No, no, you're doing it for fun, which is like the best thing possible. How many people do you know will always come to you in their 30s or 40s and like they hate their jobs and it's like can't relate, man.
you never
My
know.
worst day is better than most people's best day of the year. Like so I have to keep realizing this, you know. I'm I don't do medicine. These artists, as long as they put the focus on them, they're good. They're the magicians. They're the real
And that's what
deal.
I'm about. I'm just about the
Yeah,
music and enjoying what happened and that they're still doing what they do. That's what I'm about.
yeah,
I'm not about
absolutely.
gossip. I'm not about, tabloid stuff. I'm just about,
No, we'll just talk about all the gossip once we're off the air and nobody else can listen.
yeah, something
I'll
like
tell
that
you
for
all the
sure.
real stories. No, I'm only
All right.
kidding.
No, I know. That's awesome. Anyway, thanks for joining me, Eric. I really appreciate it.
No problem. Thanks for having
All
me,
right.
Alan. I
Take
appreciate it.
care.